Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is constant reader Scott Daly.
And I'm King Newbie, Matt Freeman.
Matt, come outside. I need to show you something.
Oh, nice. I love things.
Cool. Well, it's right here. The assigned reading is in the calendar, Matt. It's not hard.
I cry your pardon, Kingslinger. I've forgotten the face of my father.
That's right, you have. Matt, for those that don't understand what's going on right now, did not realize that he was supposed to read till chapter 4 until like late last night.
Or through chapter 4.
Through chapter 4. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I said it wrong on the last episode. The point is, it's in the calendar, Matt. It's in the schedule. It's linked to every episode, and you, more than anyone, should know that it's there.
You know, honestly, I think what happened is like I got to part 4 of some chapter, and I was like, oh, I'm supposed to stop here. And I forgot that parts and chapters aren't the same thing.
If only there weren't
sections.
If only there weren't 3.5 books in which you could learn how the structure of the series goes or anything.
Almost there, man. Almost there.
This week we are covering the longest stretch of the book so far. We're going to be covering the first 4 chapters, Matt. The first 4 chapters. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and Chapter 4 of Part 3, Come Reap. The 4th chapter is titled Roland and Cuthbert. Or is it Cuthbert and Roland? I don't remember. It's not important.
It's not. And I did finish the reading, by the way.
Yes.
So everyone, yeah.
Okay. You just had to do some scrambling this morning to get the script done.
Yes.
So on this week's reading, Roland and Susan are blinded by their love for each other as their enemies, like all of their enemies make moves around them. Cuthbert finally gets sick of Roland's behavior and lets him know with a fist. Roland snaps out of it and starts moving back against his enemies, but is it too late? Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Well, nobody has reaped anything yet. So I think King is bringing us right up to the edge, though. We spend almost this entire chunk of the book just rotating through all the side characters, clarifying their motivations, updating us on what they know and don't know. Essentially, it's the scene setting for an inevitable and probably very imminent explosion. And I find that I really enjoy these parts of stories, the slow burn, ramp up, setup phase, maybe more than I enjoy climaxes in stories, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, there are a lot of climaxes in this week's reading, though. Because of...
Well, sort of like in the back. Yeah.
It's a sex joke.
Fine. It's good. Yeah, I got you.
No, I know what you mean, though. And I think one of the interesting things about these books, the parts, rather, part 1, Susan, part 3, Come Reap, is they are parts of this greater whole that is this book. But I think each of them works as their own independent story as well. Because part 2, really, you know, we had a setup, we built up, and then we had a climax, which was Roland and Susan finally getting together and expressing their attraction to each other physically. And then we start off this part and we're doing the same thing, right? Where I mean, the first chapter here specifically is just like laying the groundwork. It's catching up on all our characters. And then we start seeing them move. And just like you said, it's ramping up the action a little bit. But it's basically treating it like it's an all new story. That's part of the greater whole of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's good stuff. I agree with you that some of the slow burn stuff is just fun. I think like I love the ending of stories, and I will always love the ending of stories. But like when you have to talk about them, when you have to analyze them, this is some of the most fun parts to analyze, I think, because you kind of see the ways in which the author is putting the pieces in place to make those climaxes work. That work is happening right now in these chapters. I
agree. And also, as much as I love Susan and Roland, I like King's ability to rotate around different characters and give you a sense of how all these people think and how they are. And and they're all so different and so interesting. And so just getting a few pages in the head of each of these people is really satisfying.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's go ahead and begin with the reading. We will start with Chapter 1, Under the Huntress Moon. This is our third moon in this book, and it is our third chapter to say... Actually, it's our 4th chapter, because we started the book under the Demon Moon. Then we went to the Kissing Moon, the Peddler Moon, and now we're back at the Huntress Moon with the Demon Moon once again in the distance. It's very spooky. The words that this chapter begins with are actually the words that we left off with last week as Roland got back into his story. True love, like any other strong and addicting drug, is boring. Once the tale of the encounter and discovery is told, kisses quickly grow stale and caress tiresome. Except, of course, to those who share the kisses, who give and take the caresses, while every sound and color of the world seems to deepen and brighten around them. As with any other strong drug, true first love is really only interesting to those who have become its prisoners. And as is true of any other strong and addicting drug, true first love is dangerous. And this is such a wonderful little opening section of the reading, Matt. This is such a tone-setting paragraph here for what basically all of this week's reading is going to be about. Roland and Susan behaving recklessly, behaving dangerously, and it just boring and pissing off everyone around them, or at least the people closest to them, which is Cuthbert when it comes to Roland. I really like this because, while this is clearly Stephen King talking to us, obviously he's our author, the book has just reminded us through that interlude we just left behind that it's Roland speaking here. Like we in that interlude had Roland say these words in dialogue. And so that reinforces the idea that while this is Stephen King, the author, talking to us, this is also Roland, the storyteller, talking to us. And so Roland, the storyteller, is making a comparison between drugs, between addicting things and love. And using heroin here is very specific, right? Because Eddie is sitting right there next to him.
I mean, I thought this intro to the chapter was pretty hilarious, considering that last week we tentatively put forth the hypothesis that maybe King was implying that this particular type of obsessive love, this pink love, as we were calling it, might have some downsides. And here he's like, young love is heroin. It's the thing that Eddie was addicted to, or devil grass, the thing that turns people into zombies, basically. Yeah. I mean, I love that he even uses the word prisoner here, which is a great connection to Eddie and Eddie's particular problem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're trying to draw specific lines here for both us, the reader, but also I think for our listeners, for our characters that are listening to the story, right? Eddie is listening to this and picking up on this and is like, yeah, got it. I totally understand. I think it's really wonderful. And it is a thing that repeats again and again throughout this chapter. Like King, every time he talks about love throughout these 4 chapters, he compares it to drugs every single time. And yeah, he's not being subtle here at all. Any subtlety that was there that I think we accurately picked up on in part 1 or part 2 is gone now that true love has actually happened, that they've actually begun to actually express their love. That subtlety is gone, and we're just like, nope, this is bad. They're doing bad. It's not good.
Yeah, I'm going to enjoy pointing out what I perceive to be a lot of connections to like drug addicted behavior this week.
Oh, that's great. I can't wait. But we move on to the Huntress Moon. A sign that summer is coming to an end, and a wonderful image of kind of what is happening in Hambry right now. Roland and Susan's enemies are on the hunt now. We know Cord is looking for her. We know Jonas knows who he is, or at least suspects who he is, and is paying more attention to him. We even have Rhea here, like on the hunt for them. Everyone is hunting them, and they are the prey, and they are not paying enough attention to notice.
Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned at the top, there's this major tonal shift as we move into this chapter from the last one, because it's like Roland and Susan, who are both these very observant and clever and rich characters. They've become stupid. They've become one-dimensional and simplified, because like the only thing going on with them right now is this obsession with each other. And so Come Reap begins with several bits that are sort of floating, omniscient adult Roland style. And then when we do finally zoom in on a pair of characters, it's on Elaine and Cuthbert. It's not on our main characters. In fact, we spend very little time in Roland's head at all. We jump over to Jonas after this. We sort of rotate through everyone. And I think the reason, basically what King has done by kind of re-injecting the adult Roland voice into the story he's basically been like, all right, we're going to zoom out, because the thing we were focusing on before has become boring, like admittedly so. And so we're going to zoom out, we're going to pan around, and we're going to get a sense of the lay of the land.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right, because that is the other part of what he's saying with the boringness of true love, right? Is that like he's basically talking to us, the reader, and being like, look, we all know this is boring. Like, we all know, no one wants, like, the exciting part of reading about a relationship is the moments leading up to the expression of love. We've gotten there. that's boring. Let's move on to other things. And I think you're absolutely right that King makes a conscious choice here to remove us from the point of view of Roland and Susan. We will not be back in Roland's point of view until the very end of chapter 4, when Cuthbert basically punches the shit out of him and knocks him out of his love spell. And that, like, it is only the moments leading up to that in which King allows us back in Roland's head, because it would be boring and there would be nothing there. He's just off. He's unfocused, and it's almost as like, let's focus on the other characters and how they're reacting to him. I mean, the whole plot of these 4 chapters still circles around Susan and Roland, but we're just not with them at all.
I think if we had been, it really would have been a very repetitive sequence of like, all right, got a plan for our next hookup, and then like a whole bunch of kind of repetitive self-justifications for why it's okay to be doing this, and a lot of repetitive like internal narration about how great Susan is. And I mean, we've it is really funny, because this is exactly what young love is like. You become very uninteresting. Like, I remember this happening to me, and I remember this happening to my friends, where I would be like, what the hell happened to my friend? They're gone. There's just that they've been replaced by a lich or something. There's nothing. They're obsessed. They're and then when it happens to you, you get it, it's really funny to me, but also, I mean, relatable, obviously.
It is. I love it. And I'm glad we get to see it from the other characters' perspectives, for sure. So let's get into some of those other characters. But first, we have this moment that's completely unrelated to the actual plot, but is, I think, part of what you were talking about with the kind of higher level narrative voice, where we get this just beautiful, picture of what Hambry looks like in the beginning of fall, as summer comes to an end and fall starts to show up. And it's just, I just love it. Some called Huntress the last moon of summer. Some called it the first of fall. Whichever it was, it signaled a change in the life of the barony. Men put out into the bay wearing sweaters beneath their oilskins as the winds began to turn more and more firmly into autumn's east-west alley, and to sharpen as they turned. In the great barony orchards of North Hambry, and in small orchards owned by John Croydon, Henry Wertner, Jake White, and the morose but wealthy Coral Thorne, the pickers began to appear in their rows, carrying their odd off-kilter ladders. They were followed by horse-drawn carts full of empty barrels. Downwind of the cider houses, especially downwind of the great barony cider mansion a mile north of seafront, the breezy air was filled with the sweet tang of blems being pressed into basket load. I think that's just a copy paste error. I don't know what a blem is. What's a blem?
Maybe it's a kind of apple. I don't know.
I guess, yeah. So one of the things that I've always loved about Magus is that King makes it feel so alive, and it is passages like that make it feel so alive. One of King's greatest strengths as a writer, I think, is creating this, I think Scott Wampler talked about it when we had him on, this small town Americana feeling in his novels. Like, he creates these small towns and then breathes life into them. Castle Rock is a great example of that. Derry is a great example of that. And I think Hambry, while obviously like different from those, because this is on another world and it's more old Western than is like small town Americana, it's still, he uses that strength to breathe life into this place. Like this paragraph I just read, and I didn't read all of it. It goes on for a while, and he does this like 3 or 4 times throughout the course of these chapters, where he just like steps back and says, this is what life, a day's life in Hambry at this time of year is like. It just makes the place feel more alive. It makes it seem like we're just, getting a peek at what life is like here. And it's just like that this place continues to go on when we shut the book. I really, really love it.
Yeah, for sure. I actually think he does a better job at this sort of thing than the majority of fantasy authors who I've read, which is quite a thing to say considering he's not like typically a fantasy writer. But, I think one reason it works so well is like the setting is mostly painted in very mundane details. Like, sure. Like the paragraph actually begins with this reference to the Huntress Moon, which is a fantasy thing in this world that we don't have that. But then the whole rest of it is basically, it could just be out of some book about, some, I don't know what areas of America grow apples, but you know what I mean? Like it could really just be from, colonial times or whatever. and so you sort of forget you're reading a fantasy novel. I mean, you forget you're reading a novel at all when you're reading King. You're just sort of like sucked into it. And yeah, I agree. This is one of his strengths. Actually, I would just call it setting building.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically for the small town Americana, because I think that's what he likes. But I think he's just really good at setting building.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to compare it to other fantasy authors, and not to disparage them, because I love plenty of other fantasy authors, we're so often in the perspective of people that have power in those books. And it's not to say we're not here. Our main character here is Roland, who is basically the son of the closest thing to a king that exists in this place. So it's not like he's not someone of power. But I think what I love about King is, especially when he steps back and does this 500-foot view, is he explores what Hambry in the Fall is like from the perspective of like the day laborers, like the normal working class people and what they're doing. Like, I mean, look at this is picking. This is what the fishermen are like in the early fall. They have to start wearing sweaters, and because the wind gets a little sharper. This is what happens on the orchards. The pickers come out, and so now you can smell the scent of fruit as they're starting to harvest the fruit, and it's all taken from that working class perspective, which makes it feel, I mean, it is mundane in that it's not fantasy driven, but it feels real. It feels like human. And I think some authors lose that perspective when they're trying to tell the stories of kings and wizards and all these things. Mm-hmm. And I think King really manages to hold on to that perspective no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that point in particular. Like, none of these characters go on to be, well, I don't know if Roland goes on to be the chosen savior, but he goes on to be somebody who is kind of an asshole. So like, there's no self-insert protagonist here, and I think that actually kind of helps focus on what's happening right now, right here. I don't know if I articulated that well.
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Yeah.
All right.
Cool. All right. Well, we cut over to our reckless, high as shit lovers, and we learn how the past few weeks have gone with them meeting and banging in secret all over the place. They're using the red rock to coordinate, using Shimi. And I love that, like, the one little bit of perspective, and I still think we're in King's kind of 500-foot level here, but we do get a little hint into Roland's head here where he has this deep warning that speaks to him about using the red rock. Like, this is dangerous. But that's all. It's like, not like, stop doing this thing. It's like, stop doing it this certain way. It's really funny.
Yeah, it's like he's got enough wits left to notice like extremely obviously bad ideas that directly impinge on his Susan banging plans. Mm-hmm. But like, that's all the bandwidth that he's got.
Yeah, I like that, because I think that still shows, like, he's not, like, he's love blind, certainly, but he's still got some common sense left in him. Like, we see later in the chapter when Cuthbert reacts to their place being torn apart with rage and want to ride out and take revenge on Jonas, Roland has a cooler head there. He's still wrong, and I love that quote. We'll get to it, but you're wrong. You're right, but for the wrong reasons or something. Yeah. And it's really wonderful. So yeah, he still has some senses about him, but just not enough, not tuned enough. And I think that's really important, because like, if there's one thing we can say about Roland, it's that he's very sharp in some ways. Like he's very attuned to things going on around him. Like not a lot gets by him, like strategy wise or planning wise. Like he's very political. We know that. So like, this is definitely a change for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, I mean, we've phrased it, I think, before as like, he's got a really strong intuition.
Yes.
But he's got like zero introspection, and the consequence, which we've actually seen repeatedly, but the consequence, we're seeing exactly the same thing again here, where like he's blind to his own kind of having lost his sense of priorities, but he's still just as sharp about perceiving what needs to be done with respect to those priorities. So he's pursuing stupid goals in an extremely clever and intelligent way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love how you put that. Yeah, that's great. You're totally right. You're totally right. So, and then we cut over to, as we said, like basically who our main characters for this week's reading are, Cuthbert and Elaine. The narrative, as we said, removes itself from Roland's point of view, and so we spend most of our time with the two of them. And I love this line here. Cuthbert and Elaine watched Roland's descent into addiction, first with disbelief, envy, and uneasy amusement, then with a species of silent horror. Mm-hmm. And while it's both of them that are doing this, both of them that are observing this, it's Cuthbert here more than anything that gets angry about it. And I love this line here where he says he calls Roland a revolver cast into water, uncertain if it would ever fire again. This is, I think, King kind of cleverly referencing the future with some lobsters, right?
Yeah, it does make you think of those wet shells immediately. And I also love the imagery. Like I was also thinking about, like sometimes a knight or a samurai will be called a sword, figuratively. So you can imagine like a gunslinger being called a gun, and throwing a gun into water would ruin it. I just think it's a great piece of both characterization and world building, because it seems like the kind of thing people would say in this world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the power of it is that like how you could be that careless with one of the most important tools in a gunslinger's arsenal, right? It's they're a gunslinger. And to use that image of talking about he's a gun that's been tossed away, that's been casually, it's like you're giving up the most essential part of you and making it so it might never work properly again. It's a very powerful imagery. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So Cuthbert is mad because he feels like he's lost his best friend, but there is a bit of jealousy here too, Matt. I was kind of prodding at you last week to see if you'd think so, because I knew this was coming up. And obviously I don't think this is fully outright powered by just Bert's jealousy, but there is definitely some of that here.
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like my take from last week was mostly right, because it's not like Bert was specifically into Susan. I think it's grating to him that Roland just sort of gets everything always. I mean, he does say that. And then also there's the element of like, yeah, Susan is hot, but I think it's closer to like the feeling when you have a best bud in high school or whatever, and then they get a girlfriend, and then you're like, what the hell, man? And you feel abandoned and betrayed, and you are jealous, but you're not jealous like you're jealous of the girl, not the guy.
Yeah, well, I think it's both. I think he is jealous of Susan, that Susan is getting all of Roland's time, and I mean, this is his best friend since he was a child, right? But yeah, I mean, I think there is some jealousy. I love the line where he says, like, why do you have to be first, Roland? Why do you have to be first with everything? And like first to get his guns, first to fall in love. And he's just, there's like just a lot of base jealousy about how the world seems to be handed to Roland in a very specific kind of way, or things just work out for him. He just gets everything. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's a complicated feeling, and it's like one of those things where you see, young friends start to transition into the teenage years, start to transition into adulthood, and the ways in which the events that occur during that time push and like pull at their friendship. And you kind of see how, if they'll be able to survive it or not, because a lot of changing going on in kids around this time, and it puts strain on old friendships. And that's exactly what we're seeing here.
Yeah, right. And there's increasing levels of strain as this section goes on, actually. I mean, by the end of it, there's a kind of forgiveness that's reached, but I feel like some permanent damage may have been done because of not just this, but because of the way that Roland has treated Cuthbert and Elaine, manipulated them really. And there's some resentment there, which I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's a thread which is going to persist on through this section, where we're going to find out how is Cuthbert and Roland's relationship after all of these events have run their course.
Yeah. Because even if they manage to, reduce the strain a little bit and mend it a little bit, there's a tear there. Yeah. What does that mean? Yeah, I like that.
And one more thing I wanted to say is, like, I've been assuming this whole time that Cuthbert and Elaine make it out of this, just because I felt like from the context of the other stories that there was just like a bunch more adventures they went on together. But like, what's funny is when I think about it, I'm not 100% sure of that. So there is a degree of anxiety that I'm feeling of like, oh, well, like maybe one of the two of them, or maybe both, don't actually make it out of this. I mean, we know Susan doesn't, but we don't. maybe we do know for sure, but I have forgotten. And so I do feel a degree of anxiety about it.
Well, because you have forgotten, I am not going to tell you.
Good.
Awesome. So, and we talked about Cuthbert, but then we have Elaine here, and he's such a fascinating character to me, Matt, because I think he feels a lot of the same things that Cuthbert feels, but I think his personality expresses them in different ways, and he's kind of just the mediator between these two boys the entire chapter. Like, he's kind of trying to patch things over. In this moment, he's trying to explain away Roland's behavior as Ka. He's like, look, man, you can't blame him because it's Ka. You can't do that. And that's interesting because we do kind of know that, right? I mean, like there was this whole big paragraph the first time Roland and Susan made love that outright said, Ka, this was Ka. But we also know that by the end of this week's reading, Roland will be snapped out of his love blindness, that he was doing the wrong thing. And it is thanks to Cuthbert's intervention that he gets out of this. Was that also Ka? Maybe.
Yeah, it's funny because I honestly just discounted the kids' like discussion about Ka because I was just like, Roland said, I think in the Wastelands, he's like, Ka is something that men can spend their whole lives studying. So I'm just like, I don't, Elaine thinks it's Ka. Cuthbert doesn't think it's Ka. I don't know. I don't think either of them is an authority on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's also there's like, there's a difference between the use of the word destiny. Let's just say as an example, I know Ka is clearly more than destiny, but let's just take it back to its simplest definition. There's a difference between the use of the word destiny as in the study of whether or not destiny actually exists and the use of the word destiny that most people use in just modern conversation, right? Like when you're just having a conversation with a friend, it's like, oh, it's destiny. Like you're not actually speaking literal destiny, right? Like Ka seems to have just become one of those words that is both this powerful thing that seems to, yes, actually exist in this world, but is also just like jargon that people say when they mean things. And it's very difficult to parse the difference between those two.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me about as solid as like two 14-year-olds in our world being like, don't be so hard on him, man. He's in love, and it's like, yeah, so, but like you can imagine that being a conversation between kids and like with their level of understanding of the concepts they're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the end of this section kind of, Roland has some very important things to say about Ka, or at least that he learns through this experience. And I really want to circle. That's kind of why I'm prefacing that conversation with all this, because I think that's really important. So
sure,
we'll get there though. But anyway, the first chapter here, this chapter 1, is basically our introduction of part 3. So as you kind of hinted earlier in the show, it jumps quickly between characters as we kind of catch the reader up and establish what everyone's up to. We had Cuthbert and Elaine. Now we cut over to the big coffin boys as we learn that Reynolds and DePape are just as nervous about the goings on as Cuthbert and Elaine are for different reasons, though. They want to act. They want to strike out and act against our quartet. But like Roland, Jonas himself wants patience. But also Jonas, like even after learning what he has learned, he still kind of sees them as babies, right? He still sees them as children. He doesn't see them as people he has to worry about too much. And I love the ways in which these two sides are kind of echoing each other, where like the assistants, the sidekicks really want to act, want to do something, and the two in the middle are just kind of preaching patience. Of course, there are differences between Jonas and Roland.
Yeah, I mean, there are echoes for sure, but it seems like Jonas actually has his eye completely on the ball. I mean, he does make the error of underestimating the boys, but I mean, over the course of this week's reading, we will see that he rectifies that error. Meanwhile, Roland is not rectifying his errors. It's his friends who have to sort him out. Right.
I mean, there's that wonderful scene that occurs in the sheriff's office where Jonas is basically like challenging Roland and showing how smart and badass he is. And we don't see Roland react to that or change strategy because of that at all. At all.
Yep.
So Jonas learns something about Roland that gets him to reevaluate him and starts taking him more seriously. And he makes moves in that regard. Roland learns something about Jonas and does not do that at all. Yeah, I mean, there are ways in which the two sides are trying to echo each other, but yes, Jonas and Roland are in very different places right now, and that is not good for our gunslinger.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, okay, this is where I'm going to go on a little tangent here, Matt, because Jonas is here sitting at the bar, and he's playing a game called Chancellor's Patience, and we don't know what this game is. The game is not described at all, but the four chancellors appear to be four of Jesus's disciples. We see they're called Peter, Paul, Luke, and Matthew, and I think King, to make clear that these are, the disciples of Jesus, has Peter holding, I think they call him the Chancellor of the Keys, which Peter, like in most biblical depictions of Peter, he's holding the keys because like he was given the keys to heaven. That's the whole thing. But this is very curious, Matt, because if I were writing a book and I were going to say, I'm going to make a biblical reference here and I'm going to pick four apostles to put on cards, I would not pick these four. I'd pick the four who tell the gospel, the first four books of the New Testament: Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. And King didn't do that here. And I find that so interesting. I mean, Peter and Paul are two important apostles as well, of course. Peter is the one that was closest to Jesus and is the man who denied him 3 times. He was later crucified in Rome, and there's a couple books in the Bible that are attributed to him, but it's dubious whether he actually wrote those or not. And Paul is, of course, like the author of most of the New Testament, and he actually was a Roman who converted after he bumped into Jesus on the road to Damascus. But I mean, I don't know why we picked these two, right? I just like I said, if I'm picking four apostles you need four apostles. Which ones? It would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because those are the Bible. Those are the gospel. That's the gospel right there. So I don't know. It's really interesting. Any ideas?
Unfortunately not, which is funny because I nominally have a ton of education about the Bible. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is definitely something that we have 4 men in this scene with the 4 apostles.
Yes.
I can't read connections between them though, because I don't remember that much about, for example, Peter. Like I have very little memory of like who Peter is in the Bible for some reason. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe like the Midworld Bible has different books. I mean, we do know that Roland doesn't recognize the story of Isaac, so maybe there are also new books of the New Testament.
Yeah, very possible.
Yeah, like you said, like it seems like in church there were always way more readings from Paul's letters than like from any other book of the Bible. So I have like this massive disproportionate representation of Paul in my brain. So I'm like, well, I can see you picking Paul.
Yeah. I mean, Paul wrote Acts too, which like the Acts are like some of the biggest sections of the New Testament. But like
Paul's
pretty huge.
It's an interesting question. It's interesting to ask why add Peter or like why Peter and Paul, and it's also an interesting question to say why not John and Mark. I don't know. I don't know where to even begin figuring this question out, though.
I don't have answers here. I just think it's really fascinating. I mean, I think the thing that we can definitely conclude on is that you were absolutely correct. We're being fed this image because Reimer and Jonas are having a conversation about loyalty, right? Loyalty to Farson, the good man. So perhaps he is Jesus and they are his disciples, right? There's 4 of them here, and they're actually having a conversation about loyalty, right? Because like Jonas calls Reimer a traitor, and I think like textually he means a traitor to the Affiliation, but I think he's also kind of accusing him of being like a fair weather supporter, right? Where he doesn't even really have like allegiance to Farson, and he's just seeing self-benefit out of it. And he gets very, very upset at that implication. And so we have these 4 apostles, and we have these 4 apostles of the good man, and one of them is accusing the other of being a traitor. There's no Judas here, but I mean Peter's choice to deny Jesus 3 times was pretty significant. So maybe that's kind of what we're trying to allude to here.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you could also maybe draw some parallels between Roland's quartet and like the characters who are missing from this scene.
Sure.
I don't know. I kind of want to sit down with the piece of paper and think this through in detail. But the thing is, like, there's so much information about all of these biblical figures that you can almost do the thing where you get the cork board and the yarn and you make whatever pattern you want, because there's so many details you could use to fill it in.
Yeah, I gosh, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's cool. And also, you know, I think one thing about the Dark Tower is that I'm always going to be alert for cards as a symbol. I mean, it definitely diminished in frequency since
the drawing. Yeah.
Since the drawing. But it's still a major symbol in the story, I would say. Yeah, it draws your attention, and you think, okay, what are we doing here? What is the purpose of this, other than just, okay, they use different card suits in their world? Right.
I mean, to build another symbol to this whole thing, the point of the game he's playing is he's trying to ferret the chancellors out of the bush, right? He's trying to expose the 4 chancellors and find where they are and turn them face up, and that's how he wins the game. And if we're going to make an illusion between these cards and Roland's quartet, as we have in the past, then Jonas is basically playing a game where he's trying to expose his enemies, which are Roland and Cuthbert and Elaine and Susan. There's our 4 right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that feels pretty strong to me, actually. I like that a lot. I like that interpretation. There's, you know, the final thing I'll point out about the cards is like, this seems, you know, hella sacrilegious. Like I don't know for a fact that there had never been a deck of cards on Earth that was biblical. but it seems to me like it would be the sort of thing that would be frowned upon, you know.
I mean, they're gambling. There's a lot of gambling implications with cards, and I don't think putting 4 saints that are some of the closest apostles to the Savior would be something that the church would think highly on.
Yes, to be put on cards to play in a shitty dive bar. Yeah,
sure.
So that's just a kind of a fun, like, this is how Midworld is different. This is how religion in Midworld is different.
Definitely. So after this, we cut over to Rhea, who, since Susan has defied her command, she's gone into a rage, and that rage has made her unable to use her magic pink glass again. And I love this. Rhea directed the stream of foul language she didn't quite dare direct at the glass, who knew what entity might lurk inside, waiting to take offense at such a talk, up at the woman in the moon. So she's furious that she can't work this thing, but she's still afraid of the power of this glass, and so takes it out on the moon. And that's kind of our chapter, Beneath the Huntress Moon. She's standing underneath it, yelling at it again.
Yeah, it's amazing to see Rhea so childishly furious, like screaming at the moon. It almost changes your perception of her character a bit, because like now we realize she's somebody who can legitimately stay up all night just mad. And she doesn't even have Twitter. I just don't have the energy for this. So, I mean, yeah, I think this is setting up the kind of person she is for later in this section where they come and try to warn her off. And it's like, that's not going to work on this person.
So we move on to chapter 2, Matt, called The Girl at the Window. And we see that the passage of time continues more ominously. We're getting closer and closer to the demon moon, and things are getting more and more ominous. And the opening lines of the chapter here are, now the huntress filled her belly, as the old timer said. Even at noon, she could be glimpsed in the sky, a pallid vampire woman caught in a bright autumn sunlight. Ugh, it's so good. The huntress filled her belly. She can be seen even at day. Like, the hunt is on, and they're getting closer, and there's nowhere to hide, even during the daylight. Yeah,
it's fascinating because like when you see Huntress, to me, I imagine like Artemis, like kind of a positive figure, but it's a pallid vampire woman. That's a less positive connotation.
It's like every single one of the moons in this fucking place is scary as shit.
Yeah,
they have the kissing moon. That one's nice. And then the peddler, who's this guy like selling souls. And then the huntress, who's a vampire, who's filling her belly, who's sucking you dry.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the demon moon. And I don't think we have to stop and explain that one. It's like for 3/4 of the year, it sucks.
Yeah, it's a nightmare world.
Yeah. So we're back with Rhea already, Matt. We left off with the end of the first chapter, and we're back with her the second chapter. She's, since we left her, she's come up with a plan. She can't make Susan cut off her hair anymore, but she can still ruin her life. And so she devises a plan to tell Cord about Susan and Roland. And just coming up with this plan, just coming up with a plan to get back at her, suddenly allows the pink glass to light up again, and she can use it again. So I was just curious what your thoughts on this were, Matt. Like she lost the ability to use this thing, and then suddenly it's given back to her, and or she gets it back, or she takes it back. We're not sure, but what do you think? What does this say about how this thing works?
Well, I mean, you could take it at face value and say that it calmed down because her focus became clear, but I mean, and that works actually, but you could also say that like the Palantir wants her to do that. It was showing her Roland from the beginning, right? Like it only shows her like fucked up shit, but then it also just randomly showed her Roland walking, riding a horse as the very first thing that it showed her. So it knows, I think it knows he's a threat. It wants her to pay attention to him. It's trying to get her back on the course, maybe. Maybe it's just a coincidence.
I mean, I do think it's funny that like she devises this plan, and it is devising this plan that allows the thing to light up again, but she gets so immediately invested in it again that she just doesn't act on her plan for like a long time.
Yeah.
Like I think at a point later she's like, oh yeah, right. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. I still got to do that.
Right. She's like relieved just having thought of a plan. Yeah. That's pretty funny.
I think it's really fascinating the ways in which the tone around Rhea kind of goes back and forth between this incredibly scary, uncomfortable person and a kind of silliness in her behavior that I think is really interesting, right? Like, I think King manages to make her scary when he needs her to be scary, but like I think that's a little silly, right? Just being like when she's so obsessed with this glass that like she just coming up with the plan, not just forgetting that she hasn't actually enacted the plan she came up with. I think it like helps actually make you more unsettling because you just don't know like which version of Rhea you're going to get at any moment.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think someone who's this unhinged, they're just sort of like adrift. They're just sort of uncorrelated with the world. And a lot of what they're doing might actually look comical. But like, then it can just flip and be terrifying because them doing something that made no sense and was therefore mildly amusing becomes terrifying when the thing that makes no sense is lashing out at someone or indulging in some terrible whim. I think maybe those you can almost view like a character who is like unhinged from all sense as being inevitably sometimes ridiculous and sometimes terrifying.
Yeah. I like that because it's ridiculous when it's just, when there's no immediate threat to you or any human. Like it's just, right. It's just like silly and like it's not, I don't want to say this because it makes me sound like a terrible person, but it's kind of comical when she throws her cat in the fire and like singes it.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying torturing cats is good, but it's just kind of silly when she does that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's meant to be a kind of dark comedy beat, actually. Because, yeah. I mean, primarily because the cat survives.
Yes.
You're just like, oh, she's childish. She's petulant and childish and impulsive, and not actually like a planner or a plotter. She's just super selfish, basically, and that's kind of almost the central thing about her.
Yeah, definitely. And I wonder, like the two villains that Roland and his team are up against are Jonas, this kind of smart planning person, and Rhea, this impulsive, really doesn't have a plan type person.
Wild card.
That's a dangerous combination of because you have to treat each of them differently, and I think we'll see at the end of this chapter the way Roland decides to treat Rhea is the wrong move.
I think so.
Yeah. So we are back with our quartet now, and we're actually in Cuthbert's head for this section as Roland returns from another romp with Susan, as Cuthbert describes it, to a very, very angry Bert, who is basically ready to confront Roland. And I think Elaine warns him before he walks in, just like, hey, just remember, be calm, be calm. But they outline their plan. The big problem that the quartet has had is that they've been like counting the fishermen's side of the town as slowly as possible, because they know when they get over to the drop, that's where all the dangerous stuff is. And when they start counting that, it might expose them, or at least expose that they're aware of what's going on. So they're running into a problem, and Cuthbert comes up with a solution. And it's basically, we'll say that we finally finished with the seacoast side of Hambry, and we'll hope to be every bit as meticulous on the farm and cowboy side, but we certainly don't want to cause trouble or be in anyone's way. It is, after all, the busiest time of the year for ranchers as well as farmers, and even certified? I don't know.
I think citified, like
citified?
Like from the city.
Cityfied. Yeah. Cityfied. Got it. Cityfied fools such as ourselves will be aware of that, so we'll give the good sheriff a list. And then Roland's eyes light up because he thinks it's such a great plan. And the thing I love about this, Matt, is Cuthbert is furious. He's steaming. He's so mad at Roland, and Roland is just totally unaware of it, right? Mm-hmm. All he reacts to here is Cuthbert's plan. And he's like, oh, great plan, buddy, great plan. And he's treating him just like he used to, unaware that Cuthbert is furious with him and so angry at him, and like he shouldn't be the one coming up with the plan. That's what the leader does. That's what Roland should be doing. Roland should have come up with this plan, but it's Cuthbert that has to do it. Yeah. And he's just completely unaware and unconcerned with how his friend is feeling, what his friend is going through, any of this stuff right now. And that only serves to make Cuthbert even madder. Like when he gives him a rough hug, Cuthbert could smell the lilac scent around Roland's collar and felt an insane but powerful urge to clamp his hands around Roland's throat and try to strangle him. Instead, he gave him a perfunctory clap on the back in return, and Roland is just unawares, totally unaware.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, Roland is high on his drug, right?
Yep.
I really do think, and this is where I'm going to start on that, like I really do think King is probably channeling some like, yep, this is what kids are like when they're in love. But I think he's also channeling some, this is what junkies are like when they are in pursuit of their fix and, you know, measuring the time until they can get their next fix and trying to make sure that there are no obstacles to getting their fix. Yeah. And when it comes to their personal relationships, it's basically all like, I'm just gonna, you're getting the minimum level of attention that I can give you so that you don't think I'm crazy. But that's it. Like yeah. It's all oriented around the next fix. It's all oriented around the drug, or in this case, the next hookup session. And like that to me feels like such a strong way of viewing Roland's behavior in this section.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, Roland sees this as not only, I'll placate you while I'm thinking about my next fix, but he sees this as a method to get his next fix. Yeah. This is a method that they can buy time again. And he's like, that's why he's so excited about it. And I think we see that because he basically says, okay, great. You and Elaine go tomorrow and deliver that message. Great idea. Go deliver it. I'm going to go get my next hit. Yeah. While you're doing that. Yeah. And that's when Cuthbert is like, no, absolutely. You're the leader. You have to be the one to do this. When we walked into this town, you were the leader. Everyone in town knows you as the leader. If we are going to do this, you have to be the one to deliver this message. And it's so obvious. And I like, he's so obviously true here. I think that's one of the things I really like about this section is like, Cuthbert is rash and impulsive and almost gets himself into trouble in ways that the other two need to calm him down. But for the most part, he is 100% right constantly. And I think that really does reinforce what's going on with Roland.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because Cuthbert, this is not like a castigation of Cuthbert, but like you almost want to say like, if Roland hadn't gone to this meeting, then maybe Jonas wouldn't have clued in to something being amiss. So it's like in Cuthbert's desire to have Roland take his proper place in their group, he has sort of forced this semi-incompetent Roland to do a really hard job, and perhaps given away the plot in a way where maybe Elaine and Cuthbert, if they had just gone, they're not as, I don't know, in some sense they're not as good at acting as Roland, but maybe that would have actually worked better because they would have come off as dumb. I don't know if any of this is true. It's because like I don't want to be like Roland. I don't want to be like Cuthbert was wrong to do this. I don't think he was. I just think it's a kind of understandable emotional catch-22 actually.
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. You think if Jonas had not seen Roland that day, when Cord came to him about her thoughts, he wouldn't have bought into it as readily?
No, see, that's the thing, and that's something I kind of made a note of later on in this in our notes is like whatever mistakes Cuthbert made are sort of secondary to the fact that Court came to Jonas with her message, and that was really enough to get the ball rolling anyway, I think. So yeah. It's just something that occurred to me that's kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah. It's certainly an interesting thought. Yeah, I mean, he is even in the sheriff's office is still kind of distracted and he's a junkie away from his fix. So yeah, definitely. I love this line though. You won your guns. These folks would hardly believe it. I hardly believe it myself just lately, but you are a gunslinger. You have to go, plain as the nose on your face. I just like you can tell, like King directly says it later in the chapter, but you can tell that as Cuthbert gets more and more angry, he's like, his swipes against Roland get a little sharper, a little more barbed, and like I hardly believe it myself lately. And I think one of his big points of jealousy of Roland is the fact that he's a gunslinger, is the fact that he not only is he a gunslinger, he's the youngest gunslinger that ever was. And that is a source of the jealousy. And I think in his anger, you see a little bit of that spill out here. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, that's not at all a subtle jab. That's
no.
I'm basically doubting your competency. And I think like Roland's continuing just ignoring their increasingly obvious frustration and increasingly barbed insults, like they're, ignoring their contempt almost. It really escalates the sense of how completely adrift it is and adrift Roland is. And it also kind of escalates their frustration level because they're like, God, like not like we could just tell him to go fuck himself and he wouldn't even respond. Like we've lost him. It's really great.
So when Roland and Cuthbert arrive at the sheriff's office, of course, Jonas and his boys are there because we will remember from last week they were engaged to help out the sheriff after his deputy broke his leg. And the big thing of this scene is that Jonas is playing castles against Deputy Dave and is dominating, right? He just blows him away. And I think that's like this is just a little section of doublespeak, of subtext here, because the two sides are speaking to each other but are more speaking in what they're not saying, or at least from Jonas's perspective for sure. Jonas here, like in the middle of this conversation, compares himself to a scorpion and the maid, like that Deputy Dave was, that it's in his nature to be sneaky and to like hit you when you least expect it, just like it's in the scorpion's nature, which is interesting, right? Because that's not quite how the story goes for us.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like a more metal midworld version of the scorpion in the frog legend.
But their plan does go off without a hitch, at least with the sheriff and the deputy and even Jonas's boys. But Jonas himself just thinks it smells wrong, right? He just... Something's not right here. It sounds good, but it's almost that it sounds so good that it feels wrong to him. Again, reinforcing the idea that Jonas is smart. He's not stupid. He's clever, and he's observant. He's like, he was almost a gunslinger. He's just a gunslinger with a lot of worldly experience, and he just ponders. He hasn't come to a conclusion yet, but I think he just says, "Are you trying to play castles with me, boy?" And he's dismissive of him still because he thinks, oh, if you're trying to be clever, you're definitely going to lose because you're just a kid. So like he susses out that there's something else going on here, but I think he's still underestimating them. But that will change soon.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually enjoyable watching Roland sort of watching Jonas sort of be the detective and put together what could be going on here and figure it out. It's funny because he's clearly the antagonist and we're not supposed to be rooting for him, but it's enjoyable watching him put it together and like pick up on these really rather small clues. I mean, it's not a small clue when Cord tells him everything, but he follows up on it in exactly the way that he should. And it's devastating, right? He's a clever operator. I think it's always important to have your antagonists be, worthy, right? Be strong and scary and competent, because otherwise it's just boring.
I like Jonas, man. And our discussion question for this week is, what is your favorite Hambry character? And we had a lot of people that said, well, none of them are really that likable. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. Jonas is not a likable character, but he's fascinating. I love reading him because he's a terrible shit and he's awful but he's smart and he's clever and he's a really fascinating person to read.
Yeah, I mean, I think later we're going to talk about Coral Thorin, and I think she's also a great character, although she's incredibly unlikable.
Yeah. So fittingly, Matt, chapter 3 begins, and it's called Playing Castles. So the chapter ends with Jonas thinking, you playing castles with me, boy? Mm-hmm. Yes, he is. So the chapter actually, though, begins with Cordelia. After witnessing the encounter with Roland and Susan, which is something we kind of just glossed over, but as they're walking to the sheriff's office, Roland sees Susan from the window. And I actually think this is kind of important, Matt, because this is one of the images that we have of Roland from earlier in the books, right? The one thing Roland kept repeating is the girl in the window. And this is that moment, right? This is the window she was in when he saw her in the window. And this is the thing when he thinks about Susan in the future that imprints on his mind at the most. Lovely Susan, the girl at the window. And so this is that moment. This is where it came from. And in this moment, he almost goes to blow her a kiss and stops himself at the last minute and just waves a friendly wave. And of course, Cord sees this, and now her brain is turning and she's like, what's going on here? What's going on here? She actually confronts Susan and says, tell me you're still a virgin. And Susan's like, I refuse to swear, which is just like, it's just the worst. This is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah. Peak teenager.
Yeah. Right. So she has decided she's going to confide in Jonas about this situation. And I love this scene, Matt, because this is the first time we see the Jonas-Cordelia relationship from Jonas's point of view. And when we last saw it, we were in Cord's point of view, and we said we found him very charming, right? He was so charming. He was so funny. He was so friendly. And now we're in his point of view, and we see very clearly that this was just entirely an act, right? This charm, this good nature, this friendliness to her was just a very convincing act that he was putting on because he saw it advantageous to have this person in his corner, and we're seeing how that's paying off here.
Yeah, right. Again, this is one of those things that makes him seem even scarier and more competent because we realize how capable of an actor he is. I mean, more capable than Roland, I would say, and we're young Roland anyway. Mm-hmm. And we're already kind of impressed by him.
Yeah, definitely. So Jonas butters up Cordelia with tea and like open flirting, and they discuss how excited they are for the burning of the scarecrows at the upcoming reap, which is ominous. But eventually they get down to Cordelia's concern, and she tells Jonas all about Will Dearborn and what she suspects. And I love Jonas's reaction to this is genuine shock, right? Not that they were banging. He doesn't care about that. The thing he cares about is that, did Will Dearborn manage to keep something secret from me? Was he managing to do something in town all this time and I didn't know about it? And this is what happens. Jonas is forced to reevaluate the Little Coffin Hunters. And finally, maybe for the first time, he sees them for what they are, not the small children he thinks they are, right? And my favorite part of this actually is like he leaves this meeting with Cordelia and he's like in shock, and he bumps into some little kids who are pretending that they're big coffin hunters too. And they actually like chopped the tail off a dog, which is like just awful and terrifying. But they basically say, we're big coffin hunters too. And he loses it at them, right? He pulls a gun on them and threatens to shoot them if they don't leave him alone. And I feel like it's just a perfect contrast to see these little kids playing at being adult is exactly what he thought Will Dearborn and his friends were. And as he's reeling with the information that maybe they're not, he comes up upon little kids pretending to be adults and like loses his shit at them. I really love that.
Yeah, it's a great moment. It's so effective how King has kept Jonas as this sort of unflappable and kind of detached presence. Even during this showdown at the saloon, he was not agitated really. And then now we reveal how furious he is to have been outwitted, and we show how feral he becomes when he's angered, and it really escalates the sense of danger on like an immediate visceral emotional level.
Yeah. It's really cool. And those poor little kids, actually, I shouldn't say that because they're clearly monsters. They chopped a dog's tail off. That is what, like, King just like drops that in there and is just like, yeah, they did that.
Yep. These are the kinds of things that kids do, I guess.
Yep. Just totally normal mid-world kid thing.
Yeah.
We also learn here just a little bit of, I think, just, plot building information that Jonas is waiting on Farson's man Latigo to come into town with some backup to pick up the oil tankers and move them out of town. And they're kind of like he's starting to get a little worried and nervous. Like they're desperately waiting for this backup to come. And so like, I love this because it's kind of showing that as things are escalating, both sides like have a deadline that's coming up and they're like wanting to hurry to get to it. Roland and Susan want to get to the Reap because that's when he can finally take her away from there and be free. And also Jonas is waiting for Farson's people to show up, and it seems like they're supposed to come about Reap time. So it's just like we're setting, like we've always kind of known that the Reap was gonna be like maybe where the climax of the story happens, but I think he's just kind of made it textual here.
Yeah, I think so.
But a nervous Jonas heads out to Sitgo, and while he's there checking out all the stuff, he finds Cuthbert's goddamn rook skull. Mm-hmm. Not idly does the rook of Cuthbert fall, Matt. Mm-hmm. There, I gave you a Lord of the Rings reference.
Yes, beautiful.
But there's this weirdness, right? Because Jonas, like, it's not just that he stumbles upon this. The King makes time to show us that Jonas is like, he's finished looking around. He's about to head home. He really wants like a stiff drink at the tavern because he's still kind of in shock from what he learned. And he just says, all right, fine. Like duty says I have to go look out this one more area. And so I'll go look out in this one more area. And that's when he finds this. That's when he finds the rook skull. And that is what allows him to know that Roland and his quartet have been to Sitgo and have found this place. And so it feels like there's some more, Destiny or Ka working here.
Cuthbert. Damn it. I think this is actually pretty interesting because remember how Roland gets so annoyed with Eddie about his silliness all the time? Mm-hmm. He's just so completely dismissive of Eddie when Eddie behaves this way and does stuff like the rook skull thing. And, it takes a pretty crucial plot event to make him realize that Eddie's way of seeing the world has value. So I wonder if you could say that mentality is tied into this event. Is Roland going to find out that Cuthbert's silliness gave Jonas this important clue? And then, it is an important clue, but also Cord tells Jonas about Roland and Susan anyway. So maybe this was just another nail in the big coffin.
Yeah. I do think that it's great that the book has never tried to even begin to explain why the fuck Cuthbert cares about this damn thing so much. Like we glossed over it, but earlier in the chapter to kind of set this moment up, Cuthbert was kind of moaning about how he lost it and he considered it an ill omen that he lost this thing. Yeah. And it's just like, why are you carrying this around? And the book hasn't tried to explain this. And it's just kind of, this is just Cuthbert being Cuthbert. And yeah, it's going to get them in trouble. So yeah, I love the ways in which King is intentionally or unintentionally maybe allowing us to learn why Roland is the way he is. I think that's what a lot of the story is, right? Why is Roland the man he is today? A lot of it has to do with this thing. And his frustration with Eddie could come exactly from moments like this, this frustration with Cuthbert's unexplained silliness that get them in trouble.
And, it's also interesting to consider that he'll probably never learn that it was his casual little saucy salute to Susan that clued Cord in on it in the first place and led to that whole event. So really there were these very tiny, I think that's one of the great things about how this whole part is set up is the tiniest little mistakes, not things that aren't even fully mistakes, but just put people's attention on guard, are the things that lead this to spiraling out of control.
Yeah, definitely. And to get a little meta, well, not truly meta, but to address our story within a story here again, I think you're right. But also Roland just said this, right? Like the story has made clear that Roland is telling the story. Mm-hmm. And so maybe, I mean, like, what do you think about the absurdity of the fact that like maybe Roland never knew until the magic that around the story exposed that to him? Like we don't know yet, but how much of this is Roland telling the story so that his Ka-Tek can understand it, and how much of the story is Roland telling the story to himself so that he can fully understand his past in perhaps a way that he never has?
Yeah, I don't know. I that's a great question. I feel like this is all true, because I would feel really frustrated if like this story ended and then Roland was like, "Of course, I made up all of the details." He'd be like, "Oh, cool, neat," but. I would prefer if it was all true.
No, I think it's true too. I'm not saying that. I'm actually saying like it's true, but Roland was not aware of all the corners of it until he started telling the story.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, imagine a moment where Roland is like, and then Cord saw my wave unbeknownst to me, and I never actually knew this before. I didn't know that this is what made her suspicious. Like, and I think a lot of that is, he has clearly never fully dealt with this moment in his life. It's because it's haunted him, and this is kind of reckoning with it. And I love the way in which like the magic of whatever magic is here that is allowing like the night to not end and allowing him to see every corner of the story, as Eddie said it, could be as much instructive towards Roland as it is towards the rest of his content.
I love that idea. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea that he's discovering this as he's telling it, or possibly when he told them like, I need one more night to dream about this. Maybe that was like his mind opening up in some psychic fashion to the fullness of the story that he hadn't been aware of previously.
That's really cool. I like it.
And so I like all of that. That's pretty cool.
Awesome.
Hey, you brought up Lord of the Rings a second ago. And then I realized that there's a part in the Lord of the Rings where the heroes go to basically a horse nation where people keep a lot of horses, and they go to a town there, and there is a guy who's the leader, but he's sort of been set aside by his vizier, who's a very manipulative and actually kind of the power behind the throne. And in point of fact, the guy who is the power behind the throne had this magical crystal ball, which then ends up in the hands of the heroes subsequently. There's probably way more parallels directly between characters that I could draw. I'm not sure if there's like an Éomer here. You could maybe draw a line between Éowyn and Susan, but it's pretty rough.
It's pretty tenuous,
but I think there's a bunch of Rohan to Hambry and etc. connections.
That's fun. Yeah, I mean, like you can call Reimer the Worm Tongue, right?
Exactly.
And Reimer reports to a
Saruman.
powerful wizard.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could also sort of draw parallels between Worm Tongue and Rhea.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, there's like as soon as I realized like, oh, horses. Oh, okay. This is Rohan. I got it. Okay, good.
I love when you do this. I love it. You didn't do it last week. We had no Matt talks about Lord of the Rings last week.
Well, I felt like we were like when we're in a story within a story. I was like, okay, yeah, this isn't the real story, and it's like, no, he's not going to stop. He's not going to stop doing these things just because it's not.
So you're bringing it back. Awesome.
Yeah, of course.
So we then cut over to Coral Thorin, the mayor's sister, and all around kind of shitty person. Coral is ruminating on the fact that basically everyone in Hambry is a traitor to the Affiliation, and she lists it out, right? All the ranchmen in the Horses Association and at least half of the large landowners are traitors and have taken up with Farson. And I love this because like I think we had suspected this, but I don't think we fully understood the scope of this yet. The scope of how much of this town is an enemy of Roland.
Yeah. For sure. You're like, oh God. I really enjoyed Coral because like she actually strikes me as being a person who has become shitty because the world has dragged her down. Like she's not like kind of a psychopath hard case like Jonas. She's conspicuously gentle to Shimi. I think she just kind of broke eventually.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what she's thinking about in this moment, right? She's kind of like thinking nostalgically about her past, and like she's looking at them set up the reap decorations and remembering her childhood with this, when this moment would have excited her to no end, and kind of wondering, how did I get to be this person? How did I get from that excited, eager young woman to this bitter old woman? And she says right here, where did I go wrong? She asked herself and laughed. Oh, dear man Jesus, where did the straying sinner child go wrong? Can you say hallelujah? She sounded much like that wandering preacher woman that had come through a year before. Pittston, her name had been, Sylvia Pittston. That she laughed again, and this time almost naturally. So, Sylvia Pittston. Yeah. For those that maybe don't remember, Sylvia Pittston is the name of the preacher woman in the city of Tull who was pregnant with the Crimson King's child, apparently. Roland did a very gross thing to her. I find this fascinating because, like, I think what King has actually been doing a lot through this story within a story is referencing and reminding us about events in the Gunslinger. Like we've just brought back our Bible allusions, which is something, I mean, you and I talked throughout the Gunslinger. There were so many biblical allusions in that. And there were some in the other books too, but less, right? The Gunslinger was a lot of biblical allusions. We talked for probably 2 hours about biblical stuff in that book. They've been using the phrase man Jesus here a lot more than has been used in the past couple of stories. And now here are some book 1 characters returning to the story. We have Sylvia Pittston stopping through this town. And I think what King is doing is kind of like starting to connect dots for us, right? Like when the world that we were in with Roland in the Gunslinger is this same world. He kind of, after that point, like he didn't leave mid-world in quotes as like the world that he lives in, but he kind of moved into a different place and things changed. Like the area around Lud is different from the area that we're seeing in the story, and is different from the area that was around Tull. It's just different. And so like he's connecting those two worlds. I think he's connecting those two books by using a lot of similar references and referential characters and language that we haven't seen since the Gunslinger.
Yeah, I really do feel like mentioning Sylvia here is mostly just a way for King to be like, hey, remember this story is the same as all that other stuff?
Yeah.
And, you know, don't be surprised if we run into some other characters. I mean, Sheb is also like in the literal room with her, right?
Yeah.
So like, which has been a thing that we may have forgotten about by this point, but she brings up Sylvia Pittston, and then she's about to, you know, and then King is about to reintroduce another character in that part of the book.
The Man in Black is about to return to our story for the first time since the Gunslinger. Yeah. I think you're totally right here. And I mean, yeah, Sheb being there. And I wonder, you know, like I've never read anything about this, but like, you know, when he was writing the Gunslinger, dude's 19 years old. Like he said like, oh yeah, and there was this guy named Sheb and he was there. And yeah, I remember him from back in my past. And then he's like, oh shit, I gotta I make like, I wonder if he had this story in mind when he wrote that book. And probably not, I think.
I would say probably not. Probably if he did, it was in like a wildly different form. Just being the kind of person who sort of has a story that they have been writing in their head since they were 12. These things just evolve. They just change over time. And yeah, so even if he did have this as part of the story in his head, he didn't really.
Yeah, definitely. So Coral is at the bar, and after taking her frustrations out on one of her prostitutes turned bartender, she pours herself a drink when she is interrupted by Rhea's cat, who Rhea's out of whiskey, and she decides to send poor Shimi out there tomorrow. And this is, as we know, all part of Rhea's plot, right? She's going to get Shimi out there so she can have Shimi deliver the letter to Cord. So we're just kind of seeing Rhea's plot kind of slowly move forward. But then we cut over to Jonas's point of view as he's preparing and reacting to what he's just learned about Roland. So once again, we talked about this earlier, but like Jonas learns something and he changes his strategy based on what he's learned, which shows how on the ball he is. They plan to post guards at Sitco, and they're planning to start moving the tankers out 2 by 2, which they say just like the animals going aboard Old Pa's Ark, which is another biblical reference, except, you know, midworldized.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard Noah called Old Pa before.
Right. But it is an ark, which is,
yes. Yes. Like I said, I kind of touched on this earlier, but this week's reading, these 4 chapters are just filled with people making discoveries, making moves, planning against Roland and his friends. Rhea's plotting to expose them. Cordelia's talking with Jonas. Jonas is realizing they're a bigger threat, and he's responding to that and making moves. And meanwhile, what is the quartet doing? Until the very end of this week's reading, until the very end of chapter 4, they're basically playing a different game, right? They're like, how do we convince them that we're counting without getting caught? Like, they're like 10 steps behind. Like, Jonas has moved beyond the illusion of counting and us. Like, he's ahead of them already here. They're playing 10 moves behind, and they're reacting slowly, and everyone around them is moving and reacting. And meanwhile, like, Cuthbert and Elaine are just like, dude, it's your turn. You got to move. You got to go.
Yeah. And Roland is convinced that he's like, no, I've got it.
Yeah.
And again, at the risk of belaboring the point, we haven't actually been in Roland's head this entire chapter, nor the last. So it really increases the sense that the world is just getting the drop on him.
Yep. Definitely. So then Jonas and Coral go off and have sex, and they both sincerely, I think, describe it as one of the best times they've ever had. And I wonder if there's something to be said about this in our whole red-pink dynamic.
Yeah, I don't know what exactly though, because like weirdly I was like happy for Coral here. I was like, hey, good for you, you know, good for you kids.
Get you some.
Yeah, and like I think maybe it does matter. Like they aren't really into each other, but this sex is giving them both something that they need. I don't know. Like clearly we're not meant to find these people admirable. But it's like the book is saying, like, this, however, was one nice thing they were able to do for each other.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, another kind of frame on it is, like, in the way that the pink glass gets Rhea all excited. These are 2 people that have just, like, agreed to do, or planned or agreed to do bad things. And now they're, like, they're reaping the benefits of that, which is just like meaningless, loveless almost sex that it feels super good, but there's really nothing behind it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, because like it's not like it's like they both walk away from the encounter with a smile on their faces.
Sure,
you know that they're not like yes, it's meaningless in the sense that they're not going to get married and have procreative intercourse going forward. It's just. It was nice. Like I think what I'm remarking on is like, to me, this was a positive thing for both of them. This is, which is confusing to me because I would have thought like, oh, it's gonna be fucked up and weird, and it was, the book just sort of played it as a good thing, and so I don't know how that fits into our red pink dynamic, because it clearly isn't like wholesome, but it's also not clearly like a terrible thing for them. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when I see my antagonist smiling, I'm like, well, that's not good. So I don't know. Like, I don't think you're wrong. I think it's such a fascinating scene for me, and I kind of read it and reread it multiple times because King does just play it very straight, and he's just like, yeah. And then, you know, they were like, hey, you want to go fuck? And Jonas was like, yeah, sure. And then they just went and did it, and they didn't even drink. Like the section in Coral's head starts with her like trying to deny that she's become an alcoholic, even though she's like drinking before noon, and like trying to pretend like she doesn't need a drink, and she gets really pissed off at her bartender for pouring her a drink, even though that's exactly what she wanted. And then the section ends with them not touching alcohol that night. Like they brought the bottle with them, but they didn't touch it because they were just all over each other. And so you're right, there is some like positive tone here that is surprising, considering these are or at least one of them is our antagonist. But yeah, I mean, it's just so super interesting. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what to make of it myself.
Well, I mean, it's not heroin. It's
yeah.
I don't know. It's clearly a one night thing for both of them that they're not going to come back to. And I'm really glad you brought up the alcohol thing, because like that is her heroin. And this was like a nice bit of human connection, not deep human connection, but yes, human connection that hit her so hard that she didn't even need her drug. It would seem to me very prudish and unlike Stephen King to be like, it was bad that these two people had sex. Like, I don't think that would be a thing that King would do or frame that way.
Sure.
Yeah, it is really interesting and thought provoking.
Yeah, definitely. What do you folks think? I want to hear it. What do you think about that sex scene?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to the final chapter of the week. Let's talk about chapter 4, Roland and Cuthbert, in which there's a fight between Roland and Cuthbert. So we begin a chapter all about Roland and Cuthbert with the two of them. They're waking up in the morning, and Elaine, who is actually our point of view character at the beginning of this chapter, is worried because he didn't sleep well, because he has very troubled dreams brought on by the touch. Because doom is approaching, Matt. This is bad. This is doom.
It's just a little doom, Elaine. Don't worry. Sorry, I'm channeling Roland here.
Sure. As they head out for a day of counting, Roland oddly just goes, "Oh," and then stops. And Cuthbert just like tosses a barb his way. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where Elaine notes that the barbs have become sharper and they have much sharper edges lately, but they just continue on. We, of course, know what this O was. Roland either saw something or felt something that told him that Jonas was coming to fuck with their place, right?
Yep. Yeah. I think it is interesting that Roland is just so goddamn good at this. Like later with the snake, he's like supernaturally good at like the physical side of gunslinger stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the kind of thing that is like just trained into you so often that even if your head is in the clouds and you're love blind, like some of those things still work. Just by instinct. Right.
Yeah. So you're going to be mad at me, Scott, but I thought the thought entered my head transiently that like you roll up like D&D character sheets for each of these kids. And Roland just has like it's completely maxed out like perception and dexterity. And he just can't ever fail a perception or a dexterity roll. And that's just who his character is. But because of that, he doesn't have any points in the other qualities. And so that's why he fucks up everything else.
Sure, Matt. This is great. Let's just turn all our characters into just a D&D character sheet.
It's the best way to think about storytelling is where are your character points? This is really valuable. I can hear the pain.
I love D&D. I don't like breaking characters down like that. But I know what you mean. Yes, he is super perceptive, but doesn't have a lot of wisdom. I don't know.
I mean, more seriously, like I do think that if you're going to give a character like some really strongly positive qualities, they have to have a lot of flaws to counterbalance them. Otherwise, they become irritating.
Sure.
And I think King did a perfect job here, because you really never hear anyone. Not that I'm big in the forums, but you don't hear anyone being like, Roland is a Mary Sue. It's not a thing because he's so obviously flawed.
Yeah. God, I hate that word. But yes.
Me too.
All right. So Cuthbert starts up again as they're traveling about sending for help back up from Gilead. He's been pushing Roland on this for a while, and Roland promises that if they still want to do that, if Cuthbert still wants to ask for help or advice by the end of the day, he will let him. Which, I mean, it's not a lie, but he's basically making a promise he knows he won't have to keep here, right? Because he's seen Jonas. He knows people are going to be fucking with their place. It's kind of shitty, right? But I think it's also very Roland. It's just very Roland.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you later realize that he's pretty sure those pigeons are dead, this feels really awful. This sucks. Like he's manipulating his friends in a way that feels very low, even for Roland at his worst.
Yeah. I mean, it is very much a part and parcel of the Roland that lets a boy fall down a mine shaft.
Exactly.
That makes choices like that is fine, manipulating the people around him to get what he wants. And sure enough, Jonas is waiting in the grass for the quartet to move on. And as soon as they do, he gets up, he walks in their place, he kills all their pigeons, he rips apart their bedding, he rips apart pictures of their family, he pees on their clothes. Man, these coffin hunters have real obsession with penile fluids on these gunslingers. He writes that their mothers are whores. He just generally destroys the place up. He actually even finds their guns hidden under the floorboard, but he leaves them there knowing that if he takes the guns, that would expose him, right? They would definitely know that it was him. He's hoping that this will just look like people in town that are sick of having them around, even though they basically know it's him immediately already, immediately.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, can I just say how much I love this scene though? Like the cold, calculated trashing of all their stuff. It makes you so mad.
It does.
And it makes you realize how like cold and precise Jonas really is. It's just a great, terrible scene where you just hate him. And I love that.
I love the detail about their mothers. This is something the book, we haven't really touched on it very much, but these are young boys, right? They're like 13, 14 years old.
Yeah.
And like, I'm 35, and if you like insult my mother, I'm just going to be like, that's stupid.
Yeah.
No, she's not.
Yeah. Grow up.
Yeah. Right. But like to a 13 or 14-year-old boy who is actually missing their mother, both of them on different occasions throughout this book so far has been like, I really miss my mom. I miss my mom. I want to go home. I'm homesick. I miss my parents. And that just sets them off more than anything. Like it's such a wonderful little detail for these characters that are homesick, that miss their parents, and then someone insults their parents and they just blow up. It's really good. It's a really nice touch. I love it.
Yeah, even Elaine is like, I mean, I want to kill him now, but
yeah. So we're back with the quartet now, and Elaine suddenly feels the touch mat. He knows that something at their ranch is going wrong and they need to go back right away. But of course, Roland already knows that, and he looks at Elaine and makes him pledge that he trusts him. Do you trust me, or do you think I lost my wits when I lost my heart, as he does? He jerked his head in Cuthbert's direction. Roland was looking at Elaine with a faint smile on his lips, but his eyes were ruthless and distant. It was Roland's over-the-horizon look. Elaine wondered if Susan Delgado had seen that expression yet, and if she had, what she made of it. I trust you. By now, Elaine was so confused that he didn't know for Meyer if that was lie or the truth. I love that scene. I love that. There's so much I love there. Yeah. First of all, do you think I lost my wits when I lost my heart, as he does? Which is so fascinating because it shows on one level that Roland is totally aware of how Cuthbert feels and is just not deigning it any time of day. He just doesn't give a shit. It's like, I know exactly what you feel, but I don't give a shit.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because, like, I mean, King has given Roland these two different friends that kind of take on two different reactions to what happens when your friend either, abandons you for a girl, or in the metaphorical sense, gets hooked on a drug, and one of them becomes angry and feels betrayed, and the other of them feels sort of lost and almost incredulous and just doesn't want to believe that this is as bad as it appears to be. And sort of, I think you could even argue that Elaine kind of keeps extending Roland chances, which is another thing that I think is like a behavior that people do when they have a loved one who's an addict. They'll keep extending that addict chances, even when the addict is just fully taking advantage of them in a very cynical and an awful way, because they can't fathom or accept or swallow the fact that their loved one has turned into someone else, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I mean, that is true. That is Elaine. Elaine is like caught in the middle and he doesn't know what to do. I love this Roland's over the horizon look, right? His eyes were ruthless and distant. And he knows this look and he doesn't know what to do with it. And all he can do is like, what would your lover think of this look that you're giving me right now? If you gave her that look, how would she react? And he just doesn't know what to do. This poor guy.
Yeah.
Even at the end here, like even when Cuthbert finally encounters him and punches him, Elaine is still like, "No, you fool! What have you done?" He just doesn't. I think Elaine just like he wants the band to stay together. He doesn't want the band to break up. And we have Cuthbert and Roland who are basically just like, I don't fucking care about the band anymore.
Yeah, he's a combination of in denial and just hurt, while Cuthbert has passed on to the grieving stage of anger.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So we then cut over to this horribly sad and scary encounter between Shimi and Rhea, where King makes our favorite character in the book go through absolute hell. Sometimes in the middle of all this cowboying and love making, we forget that Stephen King can really write a tense and horrifying scene. And I think through the perspective of Shimi, that is absolutely what this one is, right? It's scary. Like the way Shimi sees Rhea, the old woman's face had sunken at the cheeks, giving the rest of her head the look of a skull. Brown spots swarmed out of her thin hair and over her bulging brow like an army of invading insects. Below her left eye was an open sore, and her grin showed only a few remaining teeth. It's such an evocative description. I love that. The way he uses the imagery of insects. I love it.
Yeah. So to be clear, like my interpretation is that she's degrading, right?
Yes,
she looks worse because, I mean, Susan just thought of her as a hunched old woman, but now she's like decaying, basically.
Yeah. I think last week the stone, we didn't know whether this was like metaphorical or literal, but the stone seems to be sapping her life force.
Seems literal now.
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah. So she hands Shimi an envelope and has him deliver a message to Cord. The message about Susan, of course, saying that, and she tells him that if he doesn't do it or tells anyone else about it, she'll see and she'll know. But like, will she? I mean, like, we know that he spills everything to Cuthbert here. And we don't see, at least yet, that she sees that. But we've also been told, like Rhea specifically said that the stone, or the glass rather, shows her just bad things, right? Like the things people don't want other people to see, like adultery or ripping a tail off a dog or murder. Like it shows people at their absolute worst. And so maybe like she won't get to see this here because Shimi's doing like the morally correct thing, stopping Rhea's sneaking. Like what he's doing isn't bad enough to get narked on by the pink glass. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the glass seems to have its own agenda. It's not really her servant. She can only look at specific things when she has like a lot of focus and intention behind it and knows what she's looking for. So the implication is like if she could control it well enough to just like patiently watch Shimi as he walks for 2 or 3 hours, because apparently he takes his time. Then maybe she could find out, but you sort of doubt it actually. I did love the bit when he makes like the unintentional dick joke and she busts up, and it's like that's a very humanizing moment for her actually. In a chapter without much humanization of Rhea.
It's a wonderful little joke.
Yeah,
I love Shimi.
Yeah, me too.
And apparently so do all of our listeners based on the answers to the discussion question for this week.
Awesome.
So at 2:00, the quartet heads back to their ranch and finds it, well, absolutely destroyed. Cuthbert is furious and wants to ride out and challenge Jonas right away. Again, he just basically knows exactly who it is. When he recognizes that Roland knows this was happening, like knew this was going to happen and is once again cautioning him against doing anything, he nearly loses his mind. He nearly punches him right in the face. But Elaine, ever the mediator, like takes him outside, and Elaine and Cuthbert have this wonderful argument. And I wish I could read all of this. There's so much of it, but so much of this is good, Matt. Like so much of this argument between Elaine and Cuthbert is so good. Like, he's saying, why do you excuse him? Why? He asked me if I trust him, and I said I did, and I do. Then you are a fool, and he's a gunslinger. If he says we must wait longer, we must. He's a gunslinger by accident, a freak, a mutie. And then he's like, come with me, Elaine. It's time to end this mad game. We'll find Jonas and kill him. Our quartet is broken. We must make a new one, you and I. It's such powerful language, right? Like, I mean, their fellowship is broken. He calls Roland a mutie. Like,
I think, he's come up to the edge of questioning the legitimacy of Roland's being a gunslinger before, but I think here he's pretty much ready to just say like, hey, he did a weird, unusual thing, and it caught court off guard, and that doesn't mean he's actually a gunslinger. And it's I don't know, it's great that the kind of enduring faith of Elaine is like simultaneously admirable and also kind of sad, because that, I mean, first of all, he's basically wrong, because it's Cuthbert that is the one who shocks Roland out of it. Like, Roland would have never come to his senses on his own.
Right.
So in a sense, Cuthbert is right. Like, Roland is not being a gunslinger here. He's being an idiot.
There's so much good dialogue in here. You don't see, and I don't have the words to explain. If I say that Susan has poisoned the well of our quartet, you would call me jealous. Yet I think she has, all unknowing and all meaning. She's poisoned his mind, and the door to hell has opened. Roland feels the heat from that open door and thinks it's only his feeling for her. But we must do better, Al. We must think better, for him as well as for ourselves and our fathers. Tell him he's wrong. Tell him that even if he's right about waiting, he's right for the wrong reasons, and that makes him all the way wrong. Oh my God. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. She's opened the door to hell, and he feels the heat from the door and thinks it's just his feeling for her. That's such an evocative description. Mm-hmm. I love that. You're in danger. Hell is right there. But the things that you feel, you're just attributing to your feelings over Susan. Mm-hmm. It's so good.
It is.
I love it.
It is so good. And I mean, it works perfectly if you're just talking about love and infatuation, obviously, but it works just as well, if not better, if you say, this is a statement about addiction in general, which, mm-hmm. I mean, love, this kind of infatuated love can be viewed as that. But I think once again, King is channeling what it's like when you're thinking about your fix, when you're getting your fix. It's like, you feel the heat of it, right? Well, that's the door to hell, actually. Mm-hmm. I think King probably knows a lot about that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you've kind of reframed this whole thing in that angle, because if I'm being totally honest, every time I've read this, I've just said, yeah, love, addiction, get it, got it. And really, that's the only level I've looked at it on. But I think you're totally right that it informs Roland's behavior. And I think you've really made your case here. And I think it's marvelous that this is absolutely what King is channeling here. Mm-hmm. It is, as we've talked about, something he does have a very, very close and personal experience with. And so he's allowed to add that to this character in that way. It's really great.
I'm sort of impressed and awed that King was able to really dive into how bad love can be. Mm-hmm. Like most of our fiction focuses on like, oh, it's so sad when people don't get along and they break up and they have relationship problems, but like the insanity of infatuation is something that you very rarely see talked about in kind of these stark, unvarnished, unromanticized terms. And I think it's actually pretty awesome.
I totally agree. It is like, we don't want to look at this because love is fun and we like it, but we don't want to look at this darker side of it. Mm-hmm. And I think like from the very beginning, we talked about how King was channeling Romeo and Juliet in here. And I think that is what Romeo and Juliet is doing as well. Although it is not what Romeo and Juliet is remembered for, mm-hmm. because I don't know why.
Yeah, that's a good point. Romeo and Juliet is actually a whole play about how love is bad.
Yes. Or at least this kind of love.
Yes.
I think we should reframe it that. Yeah.
Pink love is bad.
Yes.
Yeah. Infatuation is a word that I think gets overloaded with like overly simplistic connotations, but that is certainly an okay word for it.
Yeah.
I mean, also like, this section that we're talking about right now, like, I just think it's so powerful how Cuthbert is basically like, hey, forget it. Our friendship is over. Too much damage has been done. Fuck that guy. But then they do come back from the brink, apparently. So that's great.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically like, I'm going to go for the ride. That's good advice. I'm going to go cool down, but you need to tell him this stuff for me. And I mean, it is Cuthbert punching him in the face that knocks Roland out of this. Mm-hmm. But I think it is equally as much Elaine telling him the words Cuthbert said here that I don't think he would have been able to say to Roland at that point. And I don't even know if the things Roland says or the things Elaine says to Roland based off what Cuthbert said. I think if Cuthbert had said them to Roland himself, I don't think they would have worked the right way. I think coming through the mediator, coming through Elaine, the words that he says that we'll see in a minute really do impact Roland, really do kind of set his mind alight and almost kind of start to break down the facade that he's put up.
Yeah.
I think so. Like, while I want to give Cuthbert credit for like finally knocking sense into him quite literally, I think we do have to give Elaine credit as well for being that person, for being like for sticking with him and showing trust in him, and therefore the words coming through Al impact him a little bit more than I do think if they would have come from Cuthbert just in anger that they would have.
I agree. I think the two of them and their different strengths and their different relationships with Roland are crucial here. I don't think either of them could have done it alone. Yeah.
So Cuthbert does take off for his ride to cool off, and he just so happens to run into Shimi, who could have and should have been at the Delgado house like 2 hours ago, but he trudged along at a turtle's pace, which I don't know. Like, that's a perfect little metaphor there, but also turtles are important things in this book.
Yeah, his thoughts are slow but always kind.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Shimi, who loves Cuthbert more than any of the others, tells him everything and gives him the note.
I had this horrible feeling this whole time that Shimi is going to get hurt because of this.
Yeah. I mean, Rhea did promise that if he did this, there'd be consequences.
But like the whole this, like I couldn't. This is horrible. I hate this. I hate, like obviously it's good for the plot, right? But like I was just like, no.
Yeah.
Leave Shimi out of it. Leave Shimi alone.
Well, anyway, we'll come back to Shimi later. First, we got to cut over to Jonas, who was talking to DePape, who just got done meeting with Farson's man. And DePape he's freaking out a bit, Matt, because the man, who is not the one that they expected, is weird. He looks like dead people that he's seen. Like, he'll just like when he'll look at him and then suddenly he'll look like a dead person, like out of the corner of his eye. And he describes him as laughing like a dead person. This is, of course, our man in black, Walter O'Dim. Did you figure this out right away, or did it take until Jonas sees him?
I think it took until Jonas was in the room with him, and then once he started talking, I was certain. I mean, admittedly, this may be in part because the voice actor has a very specific Walter O'Dim voice, but it's not like caricatured. So
sure,
yeah. I mean, I caught on pretty fast.
I don't remember when I did or not, so I like to ask those questions because I'm wondering about my first read. Like, did I immediately go uh-oh or not? I don't know. So
it's funny how much he reminds me of Blaine in this scene. I mean, part of it I think is just the wacky way of talking and referencing things from Earth, but
yeah, that is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Jonas heads to see this person. Like, we were told that this man wants to meet with Jonas immediately, so Jonas heads right to see him, and of course, as we said, ends up being the man in black. And this reminds me how much I've just missed the delightful nut that is this guy, right? He's wearing a black robe as per usual, and just look at how the way he talks. Put the bean shooter away, the man in black said. We're friends here, I tell you. Absolutely palsy-walsy. We'll break bread and speak of many things, oxen and oil tankers, and whether or not Frank Sinatra really was a better crooner than Der Bingle. I love this so much because it's just nonsense, right? Yeah. Like, there is no way Jonas would ever know about any of this, right? Like, he has no idea who Frank Sinatra is. He doesn't even recognize what the word crooner means here, but we, the reader, do. And like, it's the way in which Walter is almost like doing this specifically for our benefit, right? Yeah. Like, winking at us, the reader. Like, this is for us. Like, he's winking at us here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, either this is supposed to be an explicit metatextual thing where like we have a character who's been driven insane by his knowledge that he's a fictional character, which, I mean, that I wouldn't put it past King to do that with this story. Or, you know, he's just this unhinged guy who just brings up random things from his interdimensional travels and like maybe doesn't even know if Jonas, for all he knows, Jonas might know what that is. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's also funny that like an oil tanker is a boat, like and like I think King knows that. So I think that O'Dim here is he means, I don't know if he means oil tanker, and there is going to be an oil tanker, or if he's just making a casual mistake conflating a train car full of oil with an oil tanker. In either case, oil tanker is a word that you'd only use if you were like from Earth, and so that's or very very familiar with Earth. That's so that word also stood out to me.
Sure. I mean, and I will say that like at least when like Blaine was giving random references to shit, like Eddie and Susanna and Jake were there,
right?
Who would maybe get them. Mostly.
I mean, he did troll him about the Zuzuz or Kaze or whatever it is from the other level of the tower, but but that was explicitly him trolling them though. So
right. Like
yeah, it's interesting.
There's no way Jonas knows who fucking Frank Sinatra is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we don't actually, the two begin to palaver, but we don't actually get to see what they talk about, right? The scene cuts away before that. But this is Walter O'Dim. This is the Man in Black. This is not going to be good. Whatever he's doing here, whatever his purpose here is, it's not going to be good. Yeah,
I think we're meant to assume that the Katet's goose is cooked, at least infosec wise.
Right, because he knows
everything.
Like Jonas had some ideas.
Yeah.
He knows them all.
Yeah, he knows them all. He probably knows why they're here. Like in detail. So
yeah. So then we cut back over to Cuthbert, who finally rides back to the bunkhouse at night and confronts Roland. And for the first time all week, Matt, we're back in Roland's point of view, and we see what's going on behind that head of his, what's going on behind his apparent impassivity. And we see here that inwardly he was a turmoil of pain and indecision. Elaine had told him what Cuthbert had said while the two of them stood talking in the yard, and they were terrible things to hear from a friend, even when they came at second hand. Yet what haunted him more was what Bert had said just before leaving. You've called your carelessness love and made a virtue of irresponsibility. Was there even a chance that he had done such a thing? Over and over he told himself no, that the course he had ordered them to follow was hard, but sensible, the only course that made sense. Cuthbert's shouting was just so much angry wind brought on by nerves, and his fury at having their private place defiled so outrageously. Still, tell him he's right for the wrong reasons, and that makes him all the way wrong. That couldn't be. Could it? I love this. Yeah. I love this so much because to get back to your metaphor, you're in the head of a junkie now, and you're seeing it the ways in which they rationalize away their behavior. Yeah.
Like there's a crack in the justifications, and he's enough of a good person to be aware and be like, well, hold on, but he's like desperately trying to find a way where it's not true. And so it's going to take more than that to push him over the edge.
But it's so good. It's so good. Like I just like it's sensible. It's a sensible move. And the thing that I love about it is like he's partially right? Like that. Like not riding out and murdering Jonas is the sensible move. And like he uses that one bit of truth to justify everything. And that's why I think King repeats this line here. Tell him he's wrong. He's right for the wrong reasons. And that makes him all the way wrong. That is the most important part, right? Even if you're partially right about this one thing, you can't use that one thing to justify all of it. You are totally wrong. And that is what seems to spread that crack a little further. Such good writing.
Yeah, I love it.
So then Cuthbert leads Roland outside and just fucking sucker punches the gunslinger right in the face. Then as Roland is getting ready to fight him back, he throws the note on the floor that Shimi almost delivered, and the note exposes their love affair. It says, "Pure no more. He's had every hole of her, has Will Dearborn. How do ye like it?" Which is just crude and awful. But
I mean, again, this makes Rhea seem childish, right?
Yeah.
Like the way it's written, the speech pattern, the fact that she's like borderline literate. It's so interesting how instead of being like a formidable scary witch, she's like a childish, capricious scary witch. I really like this.
Yeah, definitely. I do too. It works. It works, right?
Yeah.
Roland's next words are, "So he had done, believing in his youthful arrogance that things would turn out. all right for no other reason. Yes, at the bottom he had believed this, that he was he and Ka must serve his love. So that's what he acknowledged the existence of Ka, but as a youth might do, he's better than it. Like mortality, right? Like when you're young, I'm going to beat death. I don't have to worry about this. I will rise above death. And I think if we're looking for a reason why Roland might see himself as a slave to Ka in the present day, and not think it's a thing that he can beat, that he doesn't even bother to go up against it when he identifies as something as Ka, he just kind of just like lies there and allows the wave of it to wash over him. I think this is maybe our first little crumb of where that reasoning comes from, right? Because he thought he was better than it here. He thought he was smarter than it. He thought that him and his love was more powerful than this thing. And he has just been shown in this moment that he is wrong. Wrong.
Yeah. And this is also pretty relatable. I mean, like anyone who's been in love has this feeling of like, the universe is parting for me. This is great. The universe must want this for me, and it's you get kind of crazy.
Yeah, definitely. Roland throws himself at Cuthbert's mercy, and the things between them, as often are between best friends, are mended somewhat, right? I mean, they're not punching each other anymore. The next day, we see actually Roland even admits that he tried to let his love lift him above Ka, but that was a fool's errand. It made me blind, but now I see. So Cuthbert is Jesus. He restores sight to the blind. So there we go. Cuthbert's the Jesus.
So Roland is the, I don't know, again, not up on my studies.
Roland's Peter. He denied Cuthbert 3 times.
Oh, holy shit.
I don't know if that's true.
No, I think he's Peter.
I don't think Cuthbert's actually Jesus.
He did it.
The man Jesus Cuthbert.
Okay. I mean, again, I think King is saying, like, you can eventually get through to an addict, but you might have to literally punch him in the face and rub their nose in irrefutable example of the consequences of their mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too personal into Stephen King's life, because I don't want to do that, but too much. But I do wonder, like, he got sober, right? He succeeded in breaking his addiction, and I wonder the ways in which the people confronted him about it, right? Like, I'm sure people confronted him. He had a wife, his family's got friends, and I'm sure people recognize these things as problems. I
think I remember, maybe this was in On Writing, but I'm pretty sure I remember a specific story where an anecdote of people having an intervention, a confrontation with him. So I think this is definitely a thing that happened to him.
Yeah, that does sound vaguely familiar. It's been a while since I've read On Writing, but that does sound vaguely familiar to me as well. So the one thing they do recognize after they have this note is that Rhea is a problem, and they decide to go deal with her. They think briefly about killing her, Matt, but Roland isn't able to do that yet. He's not the killer he will become, but King tells us he will regret that decision.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, I mean, yeah. She's going to do something terrible.
So up at the Coos, Roland calls out Rhea, who refuses to appear. He gives her plenty of warnings. He even spots her using his tricks about people that make themselves go dim. And then she sends her snake after him. And Roland, a gunslinger, just fucking wrecks it. He fires 3 shots at this thing. Imagine a snake leaping at you and you being able to fire 3 shots before it gets to you.
Yeah.
He fires twice into its body. The 3rd one blows its head fucking off. And we haven't seen a lot of gunslinger from Roland so far in this book. Like, not since Blaine, and that really wasn't even gunslinging. That was like word slinging. It's great, and it's a symbol about how things have escalated. Cuthbert earlier in the chapter says men's work. It's almost time for men's work. After Elaine says we're not men, we're boys. And I think this is a symbol that it is men's work is approaching. Yeah.
I think this is like the first time anybody fires a gun. No, that's not true. The first time Roland fires a gun. So in this book. In this book.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, definitely you're right. This is this is the escalation beginning. Things are popping off quite literally. I think, just knowing Rhea as well as we do at this point makes us just shake our heads at this whole meeting, because no way in hell was Rhea, this childish, vindictive monster, ever going to be moved by their threats, ever, and even less so after they kill her snake. You're just like, oh no, they've just pissed her off now. And I also, in this part, I love the repeated beats of like leaves blowing off the tree and landing on stuff, because to me, like, it worked as this subliminal sign, like something is off and creepy about the situation, but it didn't really gel into like, hey, pay attention to the tree. Until then, it's like, oh, it's the leaves are falling off because there's a snake in the tree, and then it's
getting ready to it's really subtle stuff. I like it a lot too. You're totally right. Yeah. I mean, and I agree with you about Rhea, that like the idea that of course this isn't going to work, and I think King really plays this up because he kind of prefaces this whole thing with, they really should have just shot her in the face here. They really should have just, everything would have been better if they just shot this old witch in the face. And look, I'm not pro shooting people in faces, but I mean,
you're on the record as being against shooting people in the faces. Actually,
That's true. That's very true. But it seems like the book is being like, Roland, like, and I actually, that's maybe an interesting thing to get to, because, if we look at this whole story as we talked about earlier, as a preview for why Roland becomes the person he is, he hesitates here. He doesn't kill when he should have, quote unquote, should have, right? And he ends up paying for it. And how did Roland become this ruthless killer? That this person that when Shimi sees him, he sees someone that could be worse than Jonas, that could potentially be worse than Jonas, and maybe even lives up to that one day. It's looking back on choices like this, where like, how many times throughout Roland's life did he turn over every single choice he made in these last moments in Hambry? Like, what if I had done something different? What if I had shot Rhea here? What if I had let Cuthbert go after Jonas? What if, like all these, I'm sure, like, we know he loses Susan at the end of this story. And we know he's never really gotten over it. So, I mean, that's gotta mess with you. And maybe that's where ruthlessness comes from. Yeah. When it's killing time, it's killing time.
Yeah. I think that this is, the real purpose of having a backstory in the first place is you show, it's not just like, and here's the sad story of how Roland lost his first love. It's really, and this is why Roland is the way he is. This is, because he's been this enigma for the entire series, really. Like, we've gotten more and more kind of windows into his soul gradually over the course of the series, but certainly in the first book, you were just like, what kind of man would just let the boy fall to his death? Like what motivates him? Why does he want the tower so badly? How did he get to be this way? I think I may have literally said in some like long ago episode, like, how did he get to be this way? And that's what, interestingly, we still don't know why he wants the tower, but as a person, we're learning a lot about why he is the way he is.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why Scott Wampler called this the most important book.
Yeah, makes sense.
And some people were like, I don't know if I agree with that. And I'm not sure if I 100% agree with that either, but I think that's why he said it, right? That's where that comes from.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah. So we right before we end, we got this moment where they're riding back into town and Roland says, "We've got to meet. The four of us. That's what you mean, isn't it? Yes, I want to tell everything I know and surmise. I want to tell you my plan, such as it is, what we've been waiting for. That would be very good indeed. Susan can help us," Roland seems to be speaking to himself. Cuthbert was amused to see that the lone crown-like leaf was still caught in his dark hair. Susan was meant to help us. Why didn't I see that? "Because love is blind," Cuthbert said. He snorted laughter and clapped Roland on the shoulder. "Love is blind, old son." So this is this beautiful moment where, like, all things are healed between them. And I also want to contrast, like, this moment where he realizes they've got to meet, the four of them together, including Susan, and the earlier moments in the story where they've got to meet, where Roland, like, gets a message and is, like, really jazzed because that means he gets to meet Susan. And I think this is totally different, right? Like the tone of these two meetings is totally different. The first one, of course, he does kind of surreptitiously. He doesn't tell his friends that, oh, this means I get to meet Susan again. This, he recognizes now that she has a part to play. It is not for his own selfish desire that he wants to meet Susan here. It is for the good of their mission, the good of what they've got to do, the work they need to do now. And she's meant to play a role in this. And that's why Cobb brought them together, if we want to speculate on that. And that's the thing he missed in this whole thing.
Yeah, I wonder if it's like a sign of how he subconsciously knows that this isn't quite right, that he's been like not just sneaking around hiding from the people of Hambry, but sort of sneaking around his own friends. I mean, they know that they know what he's doing, but he's never included them in any way. He's never attempted to introduce them to Susan.
Sure.
Which, I mean, that's like a bad sign, right?
Yeah. This actually just occurred to me, and this is a tangent, but I want to kind of run with it with you. He has never introduced them to Susan. He's definitely, but he has been very upfront with them. Like there's that one moment where he comes back and says, I've been with Susan, right? And I wonder on a subconscious level if he's like, call me out on this, challenge me on this, tell me to stop, tell me to stop doing this, you know? I wonder, and to kind of tie that into your addiction metaphor, it's like, please, I'm kind of trying to extend a hand here and ask for help in my way that I can't do. I don't know. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I find it really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's probably some degree of truth, although that doesn't necessarily mean that if they had called him out on it, he would have been like, oh, thank God, you're right, man.
Sure.
But I think that's the dynamic of a cry for help is that very often when someone answers the cry for help, they're, well, what are you talking about? I wasn't crying for help.
Right.
But it's still, it's part of a process. So
yeah.
I like that.
Cool. So we close the chapter back up at the Coos. Roland gave Rhea a lot of threats, but it seems like she heard none of them. She threatens to pay them back for what they did to her poor Ermat, the snake. When you least expect it, there Rhea will be, and your screams will break your throats. Do you hear me? Your screams will break your throats. Well,
that backfired.
Yeah, oddly enough, she just disappears from the story and we never see her again, and that's it for Rhea.
Oh man,
we'll find out
these characters.
But that is it for this week's reading, Matt. We're done. It was a long one. That was 100 pages we did. It's like one of the longest readings we ever had to do.
Cool.
But I'm glad we divided it like that. I think that's a pretty good ending.
Yeah, me too.
For our week. All right, so let's move on to our audience discussion. And last week's discussion question is, so far, which is your favorite character in Roland's Hambry story and why? And Matt, we got a lot of answers here, but a lot of our answers were the same ones.
Okay.
Sarah Penguin, Devin, Anthony S., Quarren Beand, Mark P., Public Defender, all answered Shimi. So I guess people really like Shimi.
Awesome.
Some of them went into a little bit of detail about why Shimi, so we'll go into some of those real quick. First, Sarah Penguin said, in a story where everyone is either a suspect or putting on an act, it's nice to have just one person who is not plotting or only pretending to be nice. There are a few people we've seen so far who are just good people for the sake of being good, but Shimi is just pure goodness. I agree.
For sure.
I agree.
Yeah. Devin says Shimi is so brave and pure and underestimated by almost everyone in town. He has so much more depth and intelligence than almost anyone gives him credit for. I just love him. Yeah, I mean that comes through a bit this week when he basically he sort of escapes Rhea's clutches, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And then we have Quarren Beand, who says, Shimi for sure. I'm a sucker for characters you just want to comfort and protect, and he's the youngest of his tet like I've been for most of my life. I'd say Susan, but Shimi, man, you can't help but love him.
Cool. Awesome. So that's all of our Shimi answers, right?
Yep.
Or I guess, yeah. So Fast Randall says Susan and Cord. They say they're fairly new to Stephen King, but they've noticed that he really loves to have conflict between young female protagonists and conservative moms. And they cite The Stand, Salem's Lot, and Carrie. They say they haven't read Carrie yet, but in the two other examples, the conflict is used early in the book to define the background and motivation of our protagonists and isn't a strong element in the overall plot of the books. I love that they go on to say, I love that in Wizarding Glass, one of the main sources of tension in the story is the hostile home life of Susan and how much depth lurks under it. Cord has authority, land, and misguided puritanical virtue, and Susan has beauty, youth, and is more like Cord's brother, both genetically and spiritually, than her. One of the things that makes Cord such a powerful character is how more detailed we are given about her relative to the moms in Salem's Lot and The Stand. We see her interest in Jonas. We see how much her appearance, her physical appearance, has been affected by age. We see how callously she handles Susan, along with her subtle and not subtle reactions to the horror and conflict in Susan's life. This relationship feels very, very real, and I empathize with Susan more than your standard protagonist because of it. Yeah, I love all of that. Cord definitely has a lot more depth than your average, person who sort of slots into this role in a story like this, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways in which, as horrible as she is, we do have some sympathy for her, right? And I think it's very interesting the ways in which King can kind of, thread that needle where we don't want to excuse the behavior that she has. We never want to do that because the behavior she has is bad, but that doesn't mean we can't have sympathy with her as a human being. Yeah. And I think he pulls that off. Yeah, he gives us enough humanity to connect to, but I honestly feel more actual sympathy for Coral Thorin because Cord just never does anything nice for anybody, but there is enough humanity to her to connect to. Yeah. Sympathy might be the wrong word. We understand her a little bit. Yeah. Next, we have Megan R., who says Olive Thorin. She says, I have to go with Roland and say Olive Thorin because Olive's the only one that Roland likes to. She so easily has been portrayed as the bitter, pushed aside wife, even at the first dinner. She has no malice towards Susan. She's saddened by the position they find themselves in and is more appalled by the fact that Hart is making fools of them all. Yeah, Olive is a really pitiable character, I think. I expected more Olive, actually. But yes, definitely. It hurt my heart. Yeah. Go ahead. I mean, I just like what they said about, she's it's very standard in this kind of story where the jilted wife will blame the young mistress, right? It's Susan's fault and she'd hate Susan and plot against Susan. And I'm not saying we won't get there. We might. But when we saw her at the dinner, she was sad and horrified and upset with her husband. And she's not trying to fuck over the Susan because it's her fault. Yeah. That's not her fault. It's Thorin's fault. Yeah. It always makes the character more likable when they would have been justified in being cruel and then they were not. Mm-hmm. Or at least justified within the conventions of narrative, Mm-hmm. All right, Coffin Hunter says Jonas. Good name, Coffin Hunter. They say Roland is the favorite, even his young self, but that is a bit of a cop-out. They say they really like Jonas. He's a bad dude, no doubt, but his story is interesting to me. A failed gunslinger. He almost has the skills and has lost his way. His backstory is full of insight, they say. Would his singular focus work like Roland's if he had passed the ritual? Would Roland become jaded and an outlaw if he had failed? I think that's a pretty awesome question, actually. Yeah. What separates Jonas from Roland besides one choice when you tested the line, right? Yeah, right. Would Jonas have made a great noble gunslinger if he had stayed in Gilead and mm-hmm. served, honorably? Yeah. Next up, we have Lynette B., who also picked Jonas. They said, no one in Hambry inspires much sympathy. They aren't developed well enough to like or dislike. Olive is pitiable, but forgettable. I know we are meant to like Susan, but she strikes me as hollow. One of you guys made a comment about how their story is of this tragedy is Roland's backstory, and that's exactly how I feel about her. There's something incongruous in her. She's supposed to be capable and smart, but she didn't realize what she was in for by agreeing to be Hart's gilly. In a society that has a word for sidewife, it doesn't ring true. I understand how Roland feels about her and get her role in the saga, but I don't ever read about her and think I'd like to have a conversation with this person. Anyway, I'm not meant to be criticizing Susan. Yes, Lynette, tell us about Jonas. The character who stands out as my favorite to read about in Hambry is Jonas. He's horrible but interesting. He seems like the only person in town with a brain, and King gives him an interesting backstory too. I hate him, but he captivates my imagination in a three-dimensional way that most villain characters don't. And that I agree with, Lynette. I'm not sure if I agree with all your Susan criticism. I understand where you're coming from.
Yes.
I'm not sure I agree with it.
Scott stands Susan pretty hard, folks.
I do. I love Susan.
Yeah, I think Jonas is great, honestly. Rebecca B says they have a 2-part answer. Favorite character would be Susan. I think a lot of authors struggle with the strong female character and think it all means, physical strength and emotional hard-assery. But really a strong female character is one that feels so real, it's impossible not to know them and love them by the midpoint of the story. Susan is such a great embodiment of that, a character that is so real and so relatable, even though she's only 16 and still green to the world. Other than her, they would choose Cordelia, not because I like her at all, but because she is just a really well-drawn character. You want to hate everything about her, but King writes her in a way that's very difficult to, because he makes you kind of understand her and pity her to see what lies beneath the surface that you'd otherwise miss with a less talented author.
Yeah.
I think that lines up with what we were just saying. Cool.
All right, Rebecca, Lynette, fight. Just kidding. Lastly, we have Susan Delgado herself, who, in a shocking twist, names Cord.
Wow.
Didn't see that one coming. Yes, the person who named their avatar Susan Delgado picked Cord. I kind of see where she's coming from. Or Rhea, deliciously evil.
Yeah,
I like Rhea too. She's I think there's a difference between like as like a person and like as a character in a story. And yeah, I love Rhea as a character.
Me too. I think it's interesting. I'm wondering now if Rhea is not Saruman. The good man is Saruman. Anyway,
oh my God.
Now I really got to straighten this out by next week, though. Yeah, I love Rhea.
Cool. All right, now we're going to move on to next week's question, and this is going to be a little bit of a hard one. Remember that please no spoilers for any future stuff beyond what we know right now, but here we are. We know now that almost everyone, or at least everyone in power in the sleepy town of Hambry has betrayed the Affiliation and is in league with the good man Farson. And the question then is, in what ways has Gunslinger Society brought about its own destruction? What is it about Gunslinger Society that allows a person like Farson to lead a rebellion against them that we know eventually ends in the fall of Gilead?
Cool.
So think about that. What do we know about what Farson's saying and trying to do, and what do we know about gunslingers and their society?
Yeah.
And let me know what you think.
I'm having fun thinking about this, and I don't know any future information. So, yes, good question.
Everyone, delete all the information out of your brain except for the stuff Matt knows and answer this question.
Right. Just do the thing that Scott is having to do literally constantly. So
it's hard.
Yeah.
But that is it for us here on Kingslingers. Next week, Come Reap. How was that? Was that better than last week?
That's good. Yeah.
Come Reap continues as we cover chapters 5 through 7, Matt. All the way through it. Not just up to 7. 5, 6, and 7.
Come Reap? Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, head on over to reddit.com/r/doofmedia to participate in the threads there.
Yes, and if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you'll never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else you can find podcasts.
Yeah, and if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Bidoofs Danielle E, Repairman Jack, and April S, and new Doof dancer Justin B.
Yeah, Matt, we're actually like 22 new patrons away from our next goal, and our next goal is a big one, Matt.
Awesome.
It is a original audio-based narrative written by some sort of master writer over here named Matt Freeman.
Oh my!
This is this is something that Matt has kind of been working on for a little bit of time now, right? And once we get to that patron number, we'll officially be able to begin pre-production on it. And it's something totally new for our media company, and it's something we're very excited about. So if you want to help make that happen, now is the time to do it. We're so close to that goal. Just 20 of you. There's a lot of you out there. I know it. Just 20.
Yeah.
That's it.
The more of you become patrons, the faster I write.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I mean, the real reason is it's going to be an expensive undertaking we're doing here. It's a type of production we've never done. It's going to cost us some money to make it happen, and so your support will make that happen for us. So thank you to all of those who joined this week are going to make that happen, and hopefully we'll see more of you coming soon, so we can start Matt's big secret project.
Yeah.
It's not secret to me. I know about it, but it's secret. If I say secret, that'll like pique your interest and you'll be like, ooh, patreon.com/DeveMedia.
It is a big secret, and it's very mysterious.
It's so mysterious. But of course, if you can't afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. We totally understand. It's a crazy time right now. You can help us out without spending $1 at all, just by sharing the podcast, tweeting about us, going on different Stephen King communities and sharing the podcast with people. Or, of course, you can always help us out by leaving us a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Lord of Irony, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Ka is a wheel, do you not ken it? I have read/listened to the series many times. I am constantly entertained by Scott biting his tongue as Matt almost predicts things right on the nose and hiding a grin when Matt misses. That aside, I am getting new insights to the story I love, even after so many turns of the wheel." That's so nice. Thank you so much, Lord of Irony. And thank you to everyone else who has taken the time to rate and review our show. Like we've said many times before, this actually, like, it super does help. Like, it really does. People, it helps. iTunes likes to support shows with more reviews. People tend to give shows a chance if they have a lot of positive reviews. So every one of these reviews does make a difference, and we appreciate you guys taking the time to do it.
I predicted something.
I mean, this is an old review. It's from months ago.
Oh, okay. So. Okay. So I'm probably just an idiot now. Okay, good.
Yeah, you're like 0 for 10 recently.
Okay,
that's
good.
Fine.
Good.
All right, folks, we will see you back here next week, where maybe the Demon Moon finally begins to show up. Maybe the Demon Moon. Maybe. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.